Let me share with you a story that stayed with me for a long time, one that I've come across through court records and old news reports from the UPI archives. It's a true account from Pace, Florida, back in 1988, involving a little girl who was just 4 years old. Before I dive in, I should note that the names I'm using here are chosen at random to make the story easier to follow. The real names of those involved have been kept private out of respect for their privacy and the tragedy that unfolded. This isn't just a tale to frighten, it's a reminder of how the evil one can twist faith into something dark if we're not vigilant. Grounded in true discernment and the teachings of the church, it all began in the quiet suburbs of Pace, a small town in Florida's Panhandle, where the humid air hangs heavy and the days stretch long under the southern sun. The little girl, whom we'll call Kimberly, was a sweet child with curly brown hair that bounced when she ran, and big round eyes that sparkled with the innocence of youth. She lived with her mother, Darlene, a woman in her early 30s who had once been a teacher up in Ohio. Darlene had uprooted her life the previous summer. In 1987, seeking a fresh start in the Sunshine State, she found work part-time at a local grocery store, stocking shelves and ringing up customers, trying to piece together a new life after whatever troubles had driven her south. Darlene was a deeply religious woman, raised in the Protestant tradition with a strong belief in the Scriptures. She carried her Bible everywhere, finding solace in its pages during tough times. Not long after settling in Pace, she met Mary Nicholson, a woman about 40 years old who styled herself as a local prophetess. Mary lived in a modest wooden house on the outskirts of town, where she hosted small prayer gatherings, drawing in folks who were searching for spiritual guidance. She claimed to receive direct messages from the Lord, and her charisma had a way of pulling people into her orbit. Darlene, feeling isolated in her new home, started attending these meetings and eventually moved in with Mary, sharing the space as a kind of spiritual companion. Things seemed ordinary at first, but early in 1988, Kimberly began showing signs that something was terribly wrong. It started subtly, as these things often do not, with dramatic possessions like you see in movies, but with small disturbances that a parent might dismiss as childhood whims. The little girl would wake up crying in the middle of the night, her sobs echoing through the thin walls of the house. Darlene would rush to her side, holding her close, but Kimberly's tears seemed inconsolable, as if some deep fear gripped her tiny heart. During the day, she grew irritable, snapping at her mother over the smallest things, her usual playful demeanor replaced by a sullen mood that didn't fit a child so young. Then came the voices. Kimberly started muttering words under her breath, phrases that didn't make sense coming from a 4-year-old. Her voice would drop low, gravelly, almost like an adult man's hoarse and unnatural, nothing like the high-pitched chatter of a little girl. Darlene chalked it up to stress from the move, the change in environment, maybe even picking up odd habits from television or playmates. But Mary saw something more sinister. She pulled Darlene aside one evening after a prayer session, her eyes wide with conviction. "This isn't just a child's tantrum," Mary said firmly. "Your daughter is under attack. She's possessed by a demon straight from the Scriptures, Belial himself." Now, for those unfamiliar, Belial is mentioned in the Bible, particularly in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 15, where he's described as the embodiment of lawlessness and deceit, standing in opposition to Christ. In the ancient texts, Belial is portrayed as a fallen angel, one who rebelled alongside Lucifer against the Almighty and was cast out of heaven. He wanders the earth, seeking to possess the vulnerable, especially the innocent, like children to sow chaos, disobedience, and suffering. It's an ancient curse, a force of deception that preys on the weak. Mary believed this with every fiber of her being. She convinced Darlene that the possession had its roots back in Ohio. During a non-denominational prayer meeting Darlene had attended before the move, perhaps some unorthodox ritual there had opened a door, allowing this evil entity to latch on to Kimberly. As the days turned into weeks, the signs escalated, making it harder for Darlene to deny what Mary was saying. Kimberly's outbursts grew more intense. One afternoon, in a fit of rage over something as simple as not getting her favorite toy, she lashed out at her mother, her small hands clawing at Darlene's arms with a strength that seemed impossible for such a tiny frame. The scratches were deep, drawing blood that required bandages from the local clinic. Santa Rosa Medical Center. Darlene stared at the wounds in shock, her heart pounding as Kimberly's eyes glared back with a coldness that wasn't her own. "That's not my baby," Darlene whispered to herself later that night. Flipping through her Bible for answers, Mary seized on this incident as proof. See, Belial is the prince of lies. Twisting the truth and turning love into violence, we must act before he fully takes hold. She began weaving tales from Scripture, explaining how Belial had been a high-ranking angel before his fall, filled with pride and rebellion. Cast down, he now delights in corrupting the pure, using children as vessels because their souls are so open and undefiled. Darlene, already worn down by the isolation and her daughter's changes, started to believe. She prayed fervently, but the nights only grew worse, Kimberly's mutterings turning into full sentences in that eerie voice, speaking of things no child should know, like ancient betrayals in heavenly realms. I remember reading about this and feeling a chill, because in my own experiences as an exorcist, I've seen similar beginnings. Possession doesn't announce itself with thunder, it creeps in, mimicking illness or emotional distress. But here, without proper church guidance, without the sacraments and the authority given to priests, these women were stepping into dangerous territory. Darlene confided in Mary more and more, sharing details of Kimberly's behaviors, the way she'd refused certain foods, claiming they burned like fire, or how she'd stare at religious icons in the house with hatred. Knocking them over when no one was looking, Mary nodded knowingly, her self-proclaimed prophetic gifts affirming it all. "The Lord has shown me," she'd say. "Belial entered through that cursed gathering in Ohio. We must prepare to drive him out." The community around them remained oblivious at first. Pace was a tight-knit place, with churches dotting the landscape, folks attending Sunday services and Bible studies. Darlene kept her job at the grocery store, smiling through the exhaustion, but inside, fear gnawed at her. Kimberly's weight began to drop slightly from her healthy 48 pounds as she picked at meals, sometimes spitting them out with disgust. Doctors might have called it a phase or suggested therapy, but Mary warned against secular help. The world doesn't understand spiritual warfare. She insisted, only faith can combat this. As an exorcist appointed by the church, I've always emphasized that true discernment is key. We don't jump to conclusions, we investigate medically, psychologically, before considering the demonic. But in this case, isolated from such structure, Darlene and Mary forged ahead on their own path. The signs mounted. Kimberly's dreams turned to nightmares where she'd wake screaming about the liar from the sky. Phrases echoing Belial's biblical roots. Mary interpreted these as direct challenges from the demon, fueling her resolve. By the spring, the possession seemed entrenched in their minds. Darlene journaled her thoughts, writing of her love for her daughter, clashing with the terror of what lurked inside. My little girl is fading. She noted one entry, but Mary says we can save her soul. Little did they know this belief would lead down a road of unimaginable pain. It's heartbreaking to recount, but necessary to show how the evil one exploits misguided zeal. And so, as the Florida heat began to build, the stage was set for what would come next. The initial signs had given way to a conviction that demanded action, pulling these women deeper into a battle they weren't equipped to fight. In my ministry, I've learned that the devil thrives on division and deception, and here, Belial, or whatever force was at play, was doing just that, under the guise of holy war. As the months wore on into the middle of 1988, the situation with little Kimberly took a darker turn, one that I've seen echoed in cases where evil tightens its grip without the proper spiritual armor to combat it. What started as whispers and tantrums evolved into something far more disturbing, testing the limits of Darlene's faith and Mary's self-assured prophecies. Kimberly, once a bundle of energy-chasing butterflies in the backyard, now seemed like a shadow of herself, her small body wasting away under an unseen influence that defied simple explanation. It began with her eating habits, or rather, the complete rejection of them. Darlene would prepare simple meals, oatmeal with fruit for breakfast, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, but Kimberly would push the plate away, her face contorting in disgust as if the food were poisoned. Instead, she'd wander into the yard, that patchy grass behind Mary's wooden house, and scoop up handfuls of dirt and sand, shoving them into her mouth with a feral intensity. Darlene caught her at it one afternoon, the child's lips smeared with earth, her teeth grinding on grit that no little girl should crave. "It tastes like home," Kimberly muttered in that gravelly voice, her eyes distant, as if recalling some infernal landscape. By then, her weight had plummeted from a healthy 48 pounds down to a skeletal 28, her cheeks hollowed out, her ribs visible under her thin skin like the bars of a cage. In my years as an exorcist, appointed by the Archdiocese of Indianapolis back in 2005, I've encountered similar aversions, demons despising anything pure or nourishing, twisting the body to reject God's gifts. But here, without a priest's discernment, without medical intervention guided by faith, Darlene and Mary interpreted it as Belial's defiance. Mary, drawing from her so-called divine insights, declared it a sign of the demon's full control. Belial is the Lord of lies. She'd preach during their private prayer sessions, quoting from Deuteronomy, where he's implied as a force of worthlessness and rebellion. He's starving the child's soul to claim it for his kingdom of deceit. The voices grew more varied and terrifying. Kimberly's laughter would erupt suddenly, a cackling that sounded like it came from the depths of some ancient pit, manic and devoid of joy. Other times, she'd growl low threats, her tiny frame shaking as if possessed by a beast. "I am Belial, the deceiver from the dawn of time," the voice would proclaim through her lips, recounting a backstory that chilled the women to their cores. I stood with Lucifer against the throne, cast down for my truth-telling lies. Now, I dwell in this fragile vessel, and I will shatter it before I leave. These weren't the words of a 4-year-old. They carried the weight of scriptural lore, twisted into boasts of eternal enmity. What made it all the more convincing and heartbreaking was Kimberly's sudden ability to foresee small events, a hallmark I've noted in genuine possessions where the demonic mimics divine prophecy to sow confusion. One stormy evening, as thunder rumbled over the Gulf Coast, Kimberly sat cross-legged on the floor, Her eyes rolled back slightly and announced, "Rain will flood the streets of Pace tomorrow, washing away your feeble prayers." Sure enough, the next day brought a downpour that turned the dirt roads into rivers, stranding cars and closing schools. Mary seized on this as irrefutable proof. See, the demon reveals itself through knowledge beyond the child. Belial knows the winds and waters, just as he knew the hearts of men in biblical times. Under Mary's influence, Darlene shifted from concern to action, but not the kind rooted in compassion or church authority. They began what they called treatments, harsh disciplines meant to expel the evil. It started with slaps Darlene's hand across Kimberly's cheek when the girl spat out food or uttered curses. "This is for your soul," Darlene would whisper through tears, her own faith warped by fear. Mary encouraged it, penning notes in a journal she shared with Darlene. "Punish the vessel to weaken the intruder. Keep your distance from the child, lest the demon leap to you. Trust in me, the Lord's servant, to guide this holy war." Their first formal prayer session unfolded in Mary's living room, that dim space with creaky wooden floors and faded curtains blocking the Florida sun. Candles flickered on a makeshift altar. A Bible open to passages about casting out spirits. Kimberly was made to kneel, her small hands clasped forcibly. As Mary invoked the name of Christ, the child writhed, screaming obscenities that no innocent should know. A bruise bloomed on her arm where Mary gripped too tightly. And by the end, Kimberly's body was marked with welts from the corrections a belt looped in Darlene's trembling hand, swung under Mary's urging, "Obey, or the devil wins," Mary commanded when Darlene hesitated, her voice steady with false certainty. I pause here in recounting this because it pains me deeply. I performed over 40 exorcisms in my ministry, always with the bishop's permission, always preceded by thorough evaluations to rule out mental illness or abuse. But these women operated in isolation. No sacraments, no community oversight. Darlene took Kimberly to a doctor once at Santa Rosa Medical Center, where the physician diagnosed severe malnutrition and prescribed vitamins, perhaps suspecting neglect. The girl's skin was pale, her energy sapped, but Darlene, swayed by Mary, smashed the bottle against the kitchen counter that night. Pills are of the world. Mary had said, "Only faith purifies. Belial fears the rod and the word, not man's medicine." The escalation fed on itself. Kimberly's predictions continued. A neighbor's dog would bark all night, heralding bad news. And indeed, the animal howled until dawn, followed by word of a local accident. Mary documented it all, her journals swelling with revelations that painted her as the chosen warrior. Darlene, exhausted from sleepless nights, clung to this narrative, her maternal instincts overridden by terror. If we don't fight, Mary warned, Belial will drag her soul to the abyss, where liars reign eternal. The demon, through Kimberly, taunted them. "Your blows amuse me. I grow stronger in her weakness." Neighbors in Pace might have noticed the changes the child's cries piercing the humid evenings. Darlene's withdrawn demeanor at the grocery store, but small towns often turn a blind eye to private struggles, especially those cloaked in religion. The local Protestant churches buzzed with their own revivals, unaware of the horror brewing in that wooden house. Kimberly's playtime ceased. She isolated herself, drawing crude symbols in the dirt that Mary interpreted as demonic sigils from ancient texts. In reflecting on this phase, I see the devil's classic strategy: isolate, deceive, destroy. Belial, as a figure of falsehood, embodied this perfectly, or perhaps it was human frailty amplified by unchecked zeal. Either way, the child's suffering mounted, her body a battlefield for misguided souls. Darlene's journal entries grew desperate. My daughter's eyes aren't hers anymore. The voice mocks God. Mary says we must intensify the battle, and intensify it they did, leading to preparations that would seal this tragic fate. The summer heat mirrored the inferno within, as faith twisted into something unrecognizable, far from the mercy Christ teaches. It's a stark warning, one I've shared in lectures and interviews. True spiritual warfare demands humility, not hubris, authority from the church, not self-appointment. Without it, evil doesn't flee, it flourishes in the chaos. By late January of 1988, with the chill of Florida's winter lingering in the damp air, those foggy mornings where the mist clings to the pines like a shroud, Mary Nicholson made the fateful decision to escalate their efforts into a full-fledged exorcism. She announced it one evening after a particularly harrowing prayer circle, her voice trembling with what she called divine conviction. "The Lord has spoken to me in the quiet hours," she told Darlene, her eyes alight with fervor. "We must perform the rite ourselves, here in this house, to bind Belial and cast him back to the pit from whence he came." Darlene, by now a shell of her former self, nodded wearily, her hands raw from wringing them in worry. The child's condition had deteriorated so profoundly that any action, even one fraught with risk, seemed better than the endless torment. Preparation began in earnest, transforming Mary's modest home into what they imagined as a fortress of faith. The living room, with its worn oak floors scarred from years of foot traffic and its walls adorned with faded religious prints, became the designated battleground. Mary gathered supplies with a meticulousness that bordered on ritualistic obsession. She concocted her own holy water in the kitchen sink, mixing tap water with salt she blessed through improvised prayers, reciting verses from the Psalms to infuse it with power. As Moses parted the seas, she'd intone, stirring the mixture, "So shall this water drown the deceiver." A wooden cross, roughly hewn from a branch in the backyard, was sanded smooth and placed on a table draped with a white cloth scavenged from old linens. Candles, plain white ones from the grocery store, were arranged in a circle, their flames meant to symbolize the light of Christ piercing the darkness. But the most harrowing aspect of their plan was the so-called purification regimen, a strict fast imposed on Kimberly, disguised as a spiritual cleanse. Mary decreed that the child must abstain from food and drink to weaken Belial's hold, drawing loosely from biblical accounts of fasting before great spiritual confrontations. Like Jesus in the wilderness, the demon feeds on the body's strength, Mary explained to Darlene, flipping through her well-thumbed Bible to passages in Matthew. "Starve the vessel, and the evil will flee." In reality, this was no mere day of restraint. It was planned as an extended deprivation, stretching into the days leading up to the main rite, with only sips of the homemade holy water allowed if Kimberly begged. Darlene protested weakly at first, her mother's heart aching at the thought of her daughter's already frail form, enduring more, but Mary's persuasion was relentless. "Do you want her soul saved, or her body pampered while hell claims her?" The words cut deep, exploiting Darlene's guilt over the move from Ohio and the supposed curse that started it all. As they readied the space, the entity's presence, or what they perceived as such, manifested in bursts of unnatural fury, testing their resolve in ways that left physical marks. One afternoon, while Mary was arranging the candles, Kimberly wandered into the room, her steps unnaturally deliberate for a toddler. Without warning, She lunged forward with a force that belied her emaciated state, shoving Mary hard against the wall. The older woman stumbled, her arm slamming into a chair with a crack that echoed like thunder. Bruises bloomed instantly on her skin, purple and angry, requiring her to wrap it in a makeshift bandage from the bathroom cabinet. "That's Belial's rage," Mary gasped, pulling herself up, her face pale but determined. "He knows we're coming for him." In my own encounters with the demonic, documented in cases across Indiana and beyond since my appointment as exorcist for the Archdiocese, I've witnessed similar displays of preternatural strength objects hurled, bodies contorting beyond human limits. It's a tactic to instill fear, to make the afflicted seem invincible. But here, without the protective rituals of the Roman Rite, without a team of prayer warriors or medical oversight, these women were vulnerable. Kimberly, or the voice within her, mocked their efforts openly as Mary sprinkled the holy water across the threshold. The child let out a guttural laugh, her head tilting at an odd angle. "Your pitiful potions won't touch me," the voice snarled, deep and resonant, carrying echoes of ancient malice. "I am Belial, exiled for defying the tyrant above. I'll drag you both into my realm of endless lies before you banish a whisper." Darlene, witnessing this, collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs. She had been keeping a journal, scribbling entries late at night by lamplight, pouring out her exhaustion and doubt. "My child is a stranger now," she wrote in one passage, her handwriting shaky. "The strength in her tiny arms terrifies me." Mary says it's the demon fighting back, and I must obey to reclaim her soul. "God, give me the fortitude." The preparations dragged on through those foggy days, the house growing stuffier with the scent of melting wax and unspoken dread. Neighbors might have smelled the smoke from the candles drifting through open windows. But in pace, folks minded their own, assuming it was just another fervent Bible study. Mary, undeterred by her injury, pressed forward with incantations drawn from her personal revelations. She'd stand over Kimberly, who was often confined to a corner during these sessions, reading aloud from 2 Corinthians. "What accord has Christ with Belial? Depart from this innocent one. You spirit of deceit." The responses were vicious, Kimberly's body convulsing slightly, her voice retorting with blasphemies that twisted Scripture into weapons. "Fools," it would hiss, "your God cast me out for speaking truth. Now watch as I consume this child from within." These outbursts left Darlene drained, her once vibrant faith reduced to rote obedience. She'd fetch supplies for Mary, more salt, fresh cloths, her mind numb from lack of sleep, haunted by visions of her daughter's normal laughter from better days. The winter humidity amplified the oppression, the air thick and unyielding, mirroring the spiritual weight pressing down. Mary mapped out the exorcism structure. It would span multiple days, starting with binding prayers, escalating to direct confrontations, all culminating in what she hoped would be Belial's expulsion. No outsiders were involved, no pastors from the local churches, no doctors to monitor the child's vital signs. Isolation was key in Mary's mind, to prevent worldly interference that might empower the demon. But as I've emphasized in my talks at conferences and in media appearances, like on CNN or in documentaries, true exorcism requires communal support, ecclesiastical approval, and a balance of faith with reason. Going solo invites disaster, as evil preys on the lone warrior. Darlene's resolve hardened amid the chaos, fueled by fleeting glimpses of her real daughter, moments when Kimberly's eyes cleared and she'd whimper for her mother. We have to do this, Darlene confided in her journal. For her eternal life, yet the preparations unearthed deeper fissures. Mary's arm throbbed constantly, a reminder of the physical toll, while Kimberly's fasting left her listless, her skin clammy and cold. The demon's taunts grew personal, whispering through the child about Darlene's past failures in Ohio, lies designed to erode her spirit. As February dawned, the house stood ready, a tinder box of misguided piety. The stage was set for the rite itself, but the eruptions during setup foreshadowed the horror to come strength unnatural. Words venomous, a child's body caught in the crossfire. It's a sobering chapter, one that underscores why the Church insists on rigorous protocols to protect the vulnerable from both demonic forces and human error. Without them, faith becomes a blade turned inward, cutting deepest where love should heal. The exorcism commenced on the 1st of February, 1988, unfolding over a grueling 2 weeks in the stifling confines of Mary's living room, where the air grew thick with desperation and the acrid scent of fear-sweated bodies. What they intended as a sacred confrontation with evil devolved into a nightmare of suffering, one that I've pondered deeply in my role as an exorcist, reflecting on how unchecked rituals can invite tragedy rather than triumph. Darlene and Mary, armed only with their Bibles and misguided certainty, bound Kimberly's wrists with soft cloths to a chair in the center of the candlelit circle, her frail form already weakened by the preparatory fast. In the name of the Father, Mary began, her voice steady at first, splashing the homemade holy water across the child's forehead. Kimberly's reaction was immediate, a piercing shriek that rattled the windows, her body arching against the restraints as if electrified. Day one set the tone for the horror. Mary led the chants, drawing from Ephesians on the armor of God, commanding Belial to reveal himself fully. Through Kimberly's lips came retorts laced with venom. You dare challenge me, mortals, I, who whispered lies to Eve, who turned angels against their maker. The voice boomed unnaturally loud for such a small throat, recounting tales of celestial betrayal, how Belial had rallied legions in heaven's revolt, only to be hurled into the void, nursing grudges through eternity. Darlene, kneeling nearby, joined in the prayers, but her hands trembled as she witnessed her daughter's eyes roll back, whites exposed like marbles in the flickering light. To expel the demon, Mary resorted to physical rebuke, sharp slaps to Kimberly's cheeks, meant to jolt the evil loose. Bruises formed quickly on the pale skin, but Mary interpreted the child's whimpers as Belial's weakening cries. Fight through the pain, she urged Darlene. This is war for her eternity. As the session stretched into the nights, the deprivation intensified. Kimberly was denied all sustenance save occasional drops of the salted water, her lips cracking under the strain, her stomach growling audibly amid the incantations. By day 3, her movements grew frantic. She thrashed against the bonds, the chair scraping across the floor with surprising force, leaving gouges in the wood. Mary escalated the assaults, delivering blows to the girl's torso, fists pounding the chest and abdomen, and rhythmic patterns synced to Bible verses. Out, foul spirit, she'd shout, quoting from Mark, where Jesus casts out legions. Each strike landed with a dull thud, Kimberly gasping, her ribs protesting under the barrage. Darlene hesitated at first, but Mary's glare compelled her. Join me, or condemn her to hell. Soon, mother struck daughter, tears streaming as she whispered apologies between hits. The total assaults numbered in the hundreds over those days. A relentless barrage, justified as binding the deceiver. In the quiet moments between storms, the entity toyed with him, its voice shifting tones like a radio dial from mocking laughter to sorrowful pleas, mimicking Kimberly's true self. Mommy, it hurts. It'd whimper in the child's normal pitch, only to switch mid-sentence to a guttural roar. Fools, I am Belial, master of illusions. Your violence feeds me. These manipulations eroded Darlene's spirit. She'd collapse in exhaustion, only to be roused by Mary's chants from 2 Corinthians, no fellowship with darkness, Belial. Be bound and cast into the abyss. The room became a chamber of echoes, prayers bouncing off walls stained with sweat and holy water splatters. Outside, Pace slumbered unaware. The winter rains pattering on the roof, like indifferent applause to the unfolding atrocity. By the midpoint, around day 7, Kimberly's body showed the toll vividly, swollen bruises modeling her back like storm clouds. Her breathing labored from what later autopsies revealed as cracked ribs piercing tender lungs. Internal bleeding seeped slowly, unseen but insidious, while dehydration shriveled her features, eyes sinking into shadowed sockets. Yet Mary pressed on, convinced the convulsions were signs of victory. Look how he fights, he's leaving, she'd exclaim as the child seized, foam flecking her lips, her heart racing erratically. Darlene, now fully complicit, added her own strikes to the belly, each one a betrayal of maternal love, twisted by terror. The demon's narratives grew elaborate, boasting of past possessions. I inhabited Judas, planted the kiss of betrayal. Now, this innocent pays for your arrogance. Such words fueled the frenzy, the women redoubling efforts in a haze of fatigue and fanaticism. Nights blurred into days, the candles burning low, wax pooling like congealed blood on the floor. Kimberly's protests weakened from screams to moans, her strength ebbing as starvation gnawed at her vitals. On day 10, a particularly brutal session saw Mary pinning the girl down, knees on her chest, reciting exorcism formulas she'd pieced together from books and visions. The pressure exacerbated the fractures, eliciting cracks audible in the room's heavy silence. Darlene watched in horror, but obedience held her. For her soul, she muttered, landing another blow. The voice of Belial persisted. Though fainter, you kill the host, but I endure. One tender spirit for my domain of deceit. As the second week dawned, the end loomed inevitable. Kimberly's skin grew cold, her pulse thready, yet the rites continued unabated. On the 14th, her convulsions peaked in a final, desperate flurry, body arching, then slumping limp. Mary declared it a breakthrough, but dawn of the 15th brought silence. At 8 in the morning, Kimberly's breathing ceased, her chest still under the weight of accumulated trauma, shattered bones, hemorrhaged organs, and a body starved to 40% below normal weight. Starvation and blunt force trauma. The coroner would later confirm no demonic exit, just human hands wielding faith as a weapon. In the aftermath hush, Mary and Darlene wrapped the tiny form in a blanket, laying it on the floor amid the scattered Bibles. She'll rise, Mary insisted, echoing resurrection tales, refusing to call for help. Hours passed in vigil, prayers fading to whispers, until reality intruded. Paramedics from Santa Rosa County finally arrived. Too late. rushing the body to the hospital where doctors pronounced the obvious. Through Kimberly's last breaths, the voice had murmured one final taunt. A pure soul claimed for my kingdom of lies. But in truth, no supernatural victory, just a child's life extinguished by zealotry unchecked. Recounting this phase weighs heavy on me as I face genuine evil and sanctioned rites, where protection and prudence guide every step. Here, the absence of authority turned devotion deadly, a cautionary echo in my teachings. The devil delights in perverting good intentions, turning prayers into instruments of harm. Without the church's wisdom, what begins as salvation ends in sorrow. In the wake of that fateful morning on February 15th, when little Kimberly's life slipped away in the dim light of Mary's living room, the veil of secrecy shattered, pulling the tragedy into the harsh glare of earthly justice and communal reckoning. As an exorcist who's dealt with the aftermath of spiritual battles, both genuine and misguided, I've seen how evil's fingerprints linger, not just in the supernatural, but in the human fallout that follows. Here, what began as a quest for deliverance ended in handcuffs and heartbreak, a stark lesson etched into the records of Santa Rosa County. The paramedics arrived too late, their sirens cutting through the quiet streets of Pace like a belated alarm. They found the child's body wrapped in that blanket, cold and still, with Mary and Darlene huddled nearby, murmuring prayers for a miracle that never came. The responders, trained for medical emergencies, not mystical ones, rushed her to the hospital. But the doctors at Santa Rosa Medical Center confirmed what was obvious: death by severe malnutrition, compounded by repeated blunt force injuries, ribs fractured, organs bruised and bleeding internally, a tiny frame dehydrated to the point of failure, no signs of demonic exodus, just the grim evidence of human hands turned violent under the banner of faith. The autopsy report, detailed in court files I've reviewed, painted a picture of prolonged agony. A child's suffering dismissed as spiritual warfare. Law enforcement descended swiftly. Florida state troopers and local deputies arrested Mary Nicholson and Darlene Jackson that same day, charging them with child abuse and manslaughter initially, charges that escalated as investigations unfolded. The house became a crime scene, taped off with yellow barriers fluttering in the Gulf breeze. Investigators cataloging the scattered Bibles, the makeshift altar, the journals filled with Mary's prophetic directives and Darlene's anguished confessions, neighbors who had heard the cries but attributed them to family disputes, now whispered in shock as news vans rolled in from Pensacola and beyond. The UPI wire service picked up the story, headlines blaring about a botched exorcism in the Bible Belt, turning Pace into a reluctant symbol of faith gone fatally awry. The trial, held in 1990 at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse, a squat brick building amid the pines unfolded like a scriptural drama replayed in legal terms. Mary, unrepentant at first, took the stand in her simple dress, proclaiming her actions as God's will against Belial's deceit. "The Lord commanded me," she testified, quoting verses on casting out devils, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. But prosecutors dismantled her defense, presenting medical experts who detailed the child's injuries, over 100 bruises cataloged, weight loss equivalent to starvation in famine zones. Darlene, broken and cooperative, turned state's witness against her mentor, tearfully recounting how fear of eternal damnation overrode her instincts. "I thought I was saving her soul," she sobbed, her words hanging heavy in the air-conditioned courtroom. The jury, a mix of locals familiar with fervent religion, deliberated for days before convicting Mary of first-degree murder and child abuse, sparing her the death penalty but sentencing her to life behind bars. Darlene received a lesser charge of third-degree murder. Her testimony earning leniency, 20 years, with possibility of parole. The verdict rippled through the Protestant community in Pace and wider Florida, igniting fierce debates in church halls and living rooms alike. Pastors preached sermons on the thin line between devotion and delusion, some defending the reality of demonic possession while decrying vigilante rituals. Faith without wisdom is folly. One local reverend intoned from his pulpit, referencing James on taming the tongue and, by extension, unchecked actions. Internal investigations swept through area congregations, probing for similar fringe practices, leading to policy changes, mandatory reporting of suspected abuse, even if cloaked in prayer. Families divided. Some saw Mary as a martyr persecuted for her beliefs, others as a monster who perverted Scripture. Darlene's relatives from Ohio flew in, their grief mixed with outrage, fueling calls for stricter oversight of home-based spiritual groups. Media coverage amplified the echoes. UPI articles dissected the case, comparing it to other 80s-era exorcism tragedies, like the infamous Anneliese Michel in Germany, but rooted in American evangelical soil. Florida papers ran editorials on the dangers of unregulated faith healing, sparking legislative murmurs about child protection laws in religious contexts. By the mid-90s, the story inspired audiobooks and true crime narratives, such as Faith Gone Wrong in 1995, a chilling recounting narrated with somber tones, weaving interviews with experts on cult-like behaviors. Listeners across the country tuned in during commutes, absorbing the tale as a caution against blending blind zeal with biblical literalism. It became a case study in psychology classes, dissecting how confirmation bias and isolation can escalate harmless beliefs into harm. Reflecting on this legacy, as I have in my own writings and speeches from my book Exorcism, The Battle Against Satan in the American Church, to interviews on networks like Fox News, it's a profound reminder of Belial's symbolic role. In Scripture, he's the epitome of worthlessness and lies, a force that distorts truth to breed chaos. Whether this was true possession or tragic delusion amplified by mental health issues unchecked, the outcome warns us: evil exploits vulnerabilities, turning good intentions into instruments of destruction. In my ministry, serving as one of only a dozen official exorcists in the U, I stress the Church's protocols, psychological evaluations, bishop approval, team support to prevent such horrors. Faith isn't about force, it's about surrender to God's mercy through prayer, sacraments, and community. Years later, Pace has moved on, its streets lined with new developments, but the memory lingers like a shadow in the humid dusk. Darlene, paroled after a decade, vanished into anonymity. Haunted by regrets, Mary remains incarcerated, her prophecies silenced by prison walls. And Kimberly, a forgotten innocent, her grave unmarked in some quiet cemetery, a testament to the cost of misplaced trust. This story, drawn from those dusty archives, isn't just history, it's a call to discernment. In a world rife with spiritual seekers, let it urge us toward authentic paths, where love, not violence, drives out darkness. True victory over evil comes not from our strength, but from humility before the divine.